Welcome back to Newsday. Now, reactions have been trailing a reported plan by the federal government of Nigeria to ban the importation of solar panels. The major criticism of such a plan centers on the country's recurring problems around power generation, transmission, and distribution, which collectively affect production and gross domestic product. The critical gaps being created as a result have been tempered in recent years by the rapid adoption of solar energy to power small businesses, homes, as well as keep vital medical equipment running in rural clinics. To discuss this move by the federal government, the likely impact of President Trump's 14% tariff as well on Nigerian exports to the U.S., and whether or not there could be alternatives, we're now being joined by Dr. Muda Yusuf, CEO, Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise, and a former Director General of Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industries. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here on Newsday. Yeah. Let's start with what's happening right here at home in Nigeria regarding this the solar panel situation. What's your take? Where do you stand?
Well, let's first understand the context. And the context, also in line with your intro, is that we are dealing with a major energy crisis in Nigeria.
Yes.
And the options available to Nigerians are very difficult options. We are talking about using generator. If you are on electricity, normal electricity, unless you are in band A, which is also not easy, the others you have to complement with the use of generator. And given the cost of fuel, whether you are talking about PMS, you are talking about diesel, you are talking about gas, these things are very expensive. So the only window of opportunity that looks a bit, convenient is the solar solution. Even though the initial acquisition cost is extremely very high, but the subsequent maintenance is extremely very low. And the adoption of these solar solution has been gaining a lot of traction, both within households, within SMEs, in the rural areas, in our institutions, hospitals, schools. It's gaining, very wide acceptance. So now for us to now be contemplating a ban on solar panel will worsen the energy crisis. And the point to make here is that it's not as if the government has announced clearly that it was going to ban, but it was the Minister of Science and Tech that said that in order to stimulate or incentivize domestic production of solar panels, government was thinking of banning the importation of solar panels. So our argument here is that, first, there is something about policy sequencing. You need to examine and determine your domestic capacity in any production space before you start to contemplate the idea of banning importation. So that you don't, in the process of trying to promote industrialization, create a crisis for the citizens, just as we are seeing now in the United States. So these are things that need to be carefully balanced. So there's a lot of caution that we need to take. Secondly, issues of banning or no banning is a trade policy matter. It's not a science and tech matter. And when we are talking about trade policy, it's within the remit of the coordinating Minister of the Economy, the Minister of Budget and National Planning, the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment. These are the key people that should be making pronouncements on whether you want to ban anything, you want to increase the tariff, you want to liberalize, whatever it is. Because they are in a better position to be able to understand the wider implications of any policy, both for welfare, for the economy, for industries, and all of that. So what we have put out there is a note of caution that we have to make haste slowly in this kind of policy.
Now, Mr. Muda, Yusuf, you spoke extensively about the Minister of Science and Technologies. I would say not a proclamation yet, but more like a word of advice to say this is something we're looking towards, banning the importation of solar panels to increase local capacity. Now, considering that the minister or the Ministry of Science and Technology works holistically in pushing forward the ideals of this government, and one of those ideals would definitely be fostering industrialization and building local capacity. Do you think that this is what the minister had in mind when he made this suggestion which is not a proclamation, perhaps. So the stakes, the government agencies that you've mentioned might look into this as a way to boost industrialization, like I said. And then secondly, looking at the fact that we have local manufacturers in Nigeria, but there's no way that they will grow if we continue to import. So if we say, continue to import your solar panels, what happens to the people who are producing in Nigeria? What chance do they have? And then, do you think that maybe this might even be a way for the government to now pay more attention to these local producers to see what they might need in order to make sure that they can effectively do what they do? As we've seen in other industries, with the automobile industries, where we have a lot of manufacturers now in Nigeria, we're also seeing that in farming, in agriculture, and slowly the government is looking to do this as well in the textile industry.
Well, a very valid point you have made. But the point I'm making is about sequencing. You know, if you don't have at least some level of capacity domestically, and you venture into this kind of space of banning, you are going to create a major crisis. I mean, look at the energy crisis we have in the country. One of the biggest issues we have today, apart from the issue of forex and insecurity, is energy. So if you want to support domestic production, the place to start is to interrogate the challenges that they are facing. What is the cost of your input? What is the cost of your financing? What kind of challenges are you facing, maybe at the ports? Because right now, for many of these companies, almost 80 to 90% of their inputs are still being imported. So there is no material difference. So the best way to promote industrialization, first, is to start by incentivizing whatever they are doing. It's not mutually exclusive. People can still continue to import, but you continue to support them. Just as we have seen in cement, just as we have seen in refineries. This has to, it's an incremental thing. Otherwise, the shock on the system will be enormous. I mean, look at energy access in the country today. How many people have access to energy? Look at what was happening to our hospitals, teaching hospitals. Patients were carrying generators to that kind of place, just because the electricity situation in the country has degenerated so much. So when you have a solution that people are already embracing, especially in the face of this frequent collapse of national grid, GenCos are not being paid, gas suppliers are not being paid, transformers are packing up. If you have a window to get out of that space in the meantime, we should encourage that. And let me also say at this point, this is the time for even the government to ensure that the cost of acquisition of these solar solutions and renewable energy solutions are reduced drastically. The current cost is too high. For the average Nigerian, where will you get 5 million, 3 million to be able to install these things? So let us see what the government can do. And it's a recommendation to government. Let them remove import duty, VAT on batteries. Whether it is lithium batteries, inverters themselves, let us remove all those things so that more people can have energy access. Absolutely. While the government is doing the heavy lifting of dealing with the major energy crisis of the GenCos, of the transmission company, of the distribution companies, those are heavy liftings. Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, let us create this access. It's extremely very important.
Of course, and I think you've touched on the right way to approach the fact that they're not mutually exclusive, import aspect and supporting the local producers and all that. Exactly. Well, very well said. But let's touch now on the other matter that you're here to discuss. That's the Trump tariff policy. What specific sectors of our country's economy are most vulnerable to this policy? Now, first, let me say that there are possible direct and indirect impacts. Okay. The first channel of impact is on our export directly to the United States. Okay. Because this tariff is about those who are exporting to the United States. Mm-hmm. And the percentage of our exports to the United States as a percentage of total exports is between 10 to 8%.
So it is not of such magnitude as to offset our Nigerian economic situation, because we are not so much heavily dependent on export to the United States. But of course, it will have some effect. And most of what we'll export are actually crude oil, gas, fertilizer, and maybe a few agricultural products. So in terms of materiality, it is not so material what we export. The second direct impact is those who import from the US. We have investors in Nigeria across various sectors. They are either importing machineries, equipment, and whatever, or vehicles. We also import a lot of wheat and all of that from US. Now, with what is going on now, inflation in US is likely to escalate. So whoever is importing from the United States is likely to incur a much higher cost of import. And that may create a competitiveness problem for such industries. So they have an option anyway, whether you want to continue to import from the US or you want to look at other locations where it will be cheaper. But certainly, any importation coming from US now is going to be very, very expensive because of inflation. Now, there are indirect effects. The indirect effect is that because of the wide-ranging impact of this Trump tariff, because it's very, very disruptive globally, it's going to disrupt the global economy. It's going to disrupt the supply chains globally. And when that happens, the global economy may slow down. You know, we may see a deceleration in the global economy. In fact, some people are predicting some kind of recession because of the stature of the United States in the world economy. It is the biggest economy globally. That's a GDP of close to 30 trillion US dollars. So whatever happens in that space has a way of reverberating across it. So if there is a deceleration or a contraction in the global economy, it will affect energy prices. And because we have a big stake in crude oil price, if there's a depression in crude oil price, it will affect us. Because it will affect our revenue, it will also affect our foreign exchange earnings. So it has some macroeconomic implications. That is one indirect likely implication. The other indirect implication is the impact on portfolio flows. This policy is going to trigger significant inflation in US. And once there is high inflation, the US Federal Reserve, which is the equivalent of our own central bank, is likely to raise interest rates. If interest rates goes up, then we are likely to see a reversal of portfolio flows. Because in Nigeria, we have quite a sizable amount of portfolio investment. And the portfolio investors are chasing after high interest. So if the interest rate increases in US, you may see a reversal of those flows. So that may affect our reserves, and it may also affect, our exchange rate. So broadly speaking, these are the implications, but there are also opportunities. And the opportunities are the fact that the victims of this Trump tariff war are likely to be seeking for new partners, new trade partners at bilateral level. Because it's now becoming increasingly difficult for them to trade with the United States. So we can position ourselves properly. That if you are having problem with US, maybe you are exporting something or doing business, we are available for you to do business with.
So what kind of alternative routes, or rather alternative markets can Nigeria then pivot to for its exports that are now affected by these US tariffs?
No, we have other destinations. Just as I said, it's only about 8% of our export that is going there. The other over 92% is going to Europe, going to Asia. So there are opportunities in the European market. In fact, Europe is our biggest trading partner. We have opportunities in Asia. We have opportunities even within Africa. We are talking about African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So there are other areas that we can look at, to be able to push whatever exports we have. And just as I said, we don't even have much to export apart from oil and gas anyway. And this thing will also affect AGOA. The Africa Growth and Opportunities Act, which African countries have enjoyed. Trump has thrown that completely out of the window, you know. So these are the things, these are the implications and the opportunities. Because in every crisis, there are also opportunities to look at.
So what alternative markets can Nigeria pivot to for its exports affected by the U.S. tariffs?
Yeah, that's what I just said. It's about looking at other areas.
Okay.
You look at Europe, you look at Asia, you look at other Africa countries as well. You know, there are opportunities in those areas. You know, and because of the fact that we have a weak currency, because when you are talking about exports, one of the biggest incentives to export is a weak currency.
Yeah.
When your currency is weak, it makes your products cheaper to those who are importing to other countries. So that creates a new opportunity, and that is part of the benefits of the current economic reforms. The fact that it has elevated the prospects of investment in non-oil exports. And we have been seeing a whole lot of that, both within the continent, within the sub-region, and outside the continent. A whole lot of improvement we have seen in the export environment. And it's also good that at least the current administration has done a lot in terms of, you know, attracting more investors into gas, into, you know, deep offshore of the oil and gas industry, you know, giving a lot more fiscal incentives and all of that. So there's still a lot of very bright prospects across both oil and non-oil sector.
Okay. All right, Mr. Muda, Yusuf, thank you so much for joining us today on Newsday.